This lecture is about how to build effective partnerships with families. So we're going to be talking about what a family is. We'll talk about some theories related to families. We'll talk about why these partnerships are important and what barriers there might be to establishing effective partnerships with families. And then finally, at the end, we'll talk about some strategies that can be used to create these effective partnerships. It's important to start with defining what a family is. So a family is, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, a group of persons united by the ties of marriage, blood, or adoption, constituting a single household and interacting with each other in their respective social positions, usually those of spouses, parents, children, and siblings. So I do want it to be clear that this is not just a household. So this isn't just a group of people who live in a house together. To be considered a family, there needs to be some sort of relationship beyond just living in the same place. So people need to be related by marriage or by blood or by adoption. So it's a house of people who have some more official relationship to one another. So a family can just be spouses. So it can just be two people who are connected by a domestic partnership or by marriage. But typically a family is referring to adults and children who live with them, who are related in some way. So we can see that we have two kinds of families that we typically think about. One is a nuclear family, and that would be a couple and their children. So it would be parents who are, again, married or committed in a domestic partnership who have children, either biological, adopted, stepchildren, etc., versus an extended family, which would be that couple with their children, and then also other family members as well. That could be grandparents, aunts and uncles, but somebody else who is related by blood, marriage, or adoption, living in that family with that kind of nuclear core. I always think it's important to, think about kind of that idea of that, that family kind of configuration and the nuclear family versus the extended family, and think about who children live with. So this particular graph does not show us anything about the extended family, but it does show us a bit about nuclear families, or just the family members that children live with regard to their parents. So as you can see, the numbers haven't changed very much between 2007 and 2023. So about 70% of children live with their two parents, that's the blue bars, and about 22% or so of parents or of children live with their mothers only. And then we can see that the bars where children are living with a father only or without a parent are pretty small percentages, so they are well under 10%. So I just really want you to see that most children do live with two parents. So again, about 70% of children live with two parents, and then there's about 20% or so who live with mothers only. So those are, in the United States in the year 2023, are the primary living circumstances of children in the United States and who their families consist of.
So the bottom line with examining who children live with and who lives with children is to recognize the fact that children live in systems. Children don't live alone in vacuums. They live in some sort of family configuration, and then beyond that family configuration, they exist in neighborhoods and in peer groups and in educational settings and faith-based settings. So the idea is that children are not on their own. They're not living by themselves. So at this point, it's important for us to take a step back and look at systems theories to think about how they inform us about development, particularly the development of children. So systems theories at their core are theories that focus on how our development proceeds in relation to being in context, to being in context with other people and in other settings and in other systems. So you can see from the definition, systems theories in general examine how a group of objects works together, or a group of people, to produce some result, in this case, the child's developmental outcomes. It can be applied to single organisms, in this case, the child, societal organisms, and/or machines. So we're going to think about it as applying to single organisms, children, how they function in their family units, and how that produces various developmental results. So we're going to talk about two different systems theories that apply to family relationships in thinking about children's development. So the first is Bowen's family system theory, and the second is Bronfenbrender's bioecological theory. So the first systems theory that we're going to take a look at is Bowen's family systems theory. So the idea here is that families function as a system, that different members of the family play different roles, and that there are rules that go along with having those particular roles. So, if we think about kind of a gender typical society, and we think about the role of moms versus the role of dads. Now we know that's not how all families work, but that's one way to think about the role of different family members, or maybe the role of the oldest sibling versus the youngest sibling, or the only boy in the family. So these roles and rules aren't necessarily set, but families assign these roles, or they just get assigned naturally across time, so that families can function as a system in a particular way. So based on whatever role you get and what rules go along with your role, people are expected to interact with and respond to one another in a particular way. So if you're the youngest child and you're, have the role of kind of the silly one, the one who's kind of the life of the party, then that's kind of the function that you're supposed to have. If it's a more traditional gendered household, and mom is supposed to cook dinner and dad is supposed to mow the lawn, then that's what people are expected to do to keep the system functioning. So patterns develop across time, and the way in which family members interact with each other impacts other family members in predictable ways. You just kind of have a system that evolves over time and hopefully works well. Sometimes these roles and rules don't work particularly well, and families are kind of dysfunctional, but the hope is that the way that these structures are set up is advantageous and helps families to work better. So you can see that these behavioral patterns can either lead to balance or they can lead to dysfunction, and sometimes that shifts. Sometimes families are working well, and sometimes families need to readjust. So case in point, as children get older, parents need to readjust, because now they have an adult child, not a child, and if you're still trying to treat your young adult or your adult child like a younger child, families aren't going to work very well, and things need to adapt and evolve over time. Or if a new baby comes home, the family needs to adjust and make room and adapt, otherwise it's not going to be functioning particularly well. So this particular theory gets applied a lot in therapeutic sessions. So if you were having a dysfunctional moment in your family and you came to seek therapy, so family therapy, this theory is designed to kind of help things get back on track and be in balance. So if you're interested in learning more about this theory, you can click on the link below, and that will give you some more information.
Family systems theories can be used to think about the internal workings of families, like I was discussing on the previous slide with Bowen's family systems theory. But family systems theories can also be used to think about how families interact with folks on the outside. So we can also use them to apply to our work as early educators with those family systems. So on this slide, this chart was taken from your textbook, and it helps us to think about how families might interact with schools or workplaces or things outside the family system, but also gives us helpful information as early child practitioners about how to better navigate those family systems that might exist. So it talks about boundaries, how some families have more open or permeable boundaries. So a family with a more open or permeable boundary might be more interested in and willing to talk with others, get information from outside the system, work together as a team with an early care provider, whereas a family that has more closed boundaries may not be as willing to have those collaborative relationships or may find it harder to accept information from the outside. So you can see how those different kinds of boundaries might make it more challenging or easier to work with families depending on how open or closed that boundary is. We talked on the previous slide also about the roles. So as an early childhood practitioner, you may have more interaction with certain parents or certain family members than others, depending on their role. And we're going to talk more about who is more likely to participate in school involvement on some later slides, but just to suffice it to say now that there may be a family member who is designated the one that does the interacting. So traditionally that's potentially the mom or a female person in the family is the one doing drop-off or conferences at the school or interacting with teachers. So your interactions with certain families may be more expansive or more limited depending on those family roles. There may be rules for engagement. So I've been thinking about sort of how one interacts with professionals outside the family. So some cultures or families may be very deferential to teachers and just say yes to whatever a teacher says, whereas other families may have cultural rules that are more questioning. So they want to ask questions and be more involved, or that their house rules will be the ones that are utilized in a classroom. So there could be cultural values, rules, family dynamics that suggest how schools and families are meant to interact with one another. Hierarchies in decision making. So in some households, mothers make decisions about certain things while fathers make decisions about others, or maybe the father makes all the decisions about all things, or maybe it's another person in the family who makes the decisions. So in the one particular classroom I worked in, it was a grandma and a mother caring for a child, and the mother deferred to the grandmother. It was clear that in that family system, the hierarchy was that the grandma made the decisions, even about child rearing. So the mother was always checking in with grandma to find out what we should be doing about a particular thing related to the child. And that was obviously important to know that hierarchy and those rules and roles in that particular family. So there's also family climate. So this is a little bit less about how a family might interact with folks outside the family, but some families have climates that are more emotionally charged and more negative tone, and some children grow up in a climate where um, the climate is less emotionally charged and the tone is more positive. But for you as an educator, that child is going to be bringing that relational pattern to their interactions with you and the children in the classroom, and that relational pattern might be present in your interactions with the family as well, particularly during conference times. Finally, in family systems, we talk about something called equilibrium. So equilibrium is what I was referring to in the previous slide, families need to adjust and grow and change across time. So you can't navigate family relationships with your child when they're a teenager the same way you did when they were 2. So families have to constantly adapt and change and, be ready to work with new systems. So, the child care system is very different than talking with a high school teacher or a high school principal or a high school coach. And so families are constantly having to reestablish all these boundaries and roles and rules and hierarchies to kind of keep the family system functioning. If you stay static and never change the way that interactions are happening with outside entities, the family won't function very well. And we want families to function well across time, not just at a particular moment in time. So those are elements of family systems from a more traditional family systems theory, like Bowen's family systems theory. And on the next slide, we'll also talk about Bronfenbrenner. So we've talked about Bronfenbrenner previously, but I do want to talk about Bronfenbrenner again here because he is an example of a way to conceptualize systems theories that's slightly different from Bowen.
Probably more familiar to you is Bronfenbrenner's bioecological theory. So this particular theory looks at how we impact our environments and how our environments impact us. So you can see that there's levels of impact. I impact my microsystem, the people who exist in the world close to me, and I impact all the way out to the macro system, laws and rules and societal things and the time period that I live in. And in turn, all of those things impact me. So my development is going to look different depending on the systems that I'm exposed to, the time period that I live in, the culture that I'm existing in. So bidirectional relationship between these systems. So each system has a different definition, and we're going to take a look at those on the next slide. There are 5 systems in bioecological theory. So the first one is the microsystem. So these are systems that you have immediate direct contact with. So when you're a baby, that immediate contact is probably whoever's caring for you. That could be your mother, your father, a grandparent, an older sibling, an adoptive parent, whoever is responsible for you. As we go across time, those microsystems change and add in our teachers and our peers and other people that we have direct contact with. The mesosystem is the connections between those different entities that you have contact with. So as you go off to school, is there a good relationship between your family caregivers and your teacher? Is there continuity between the ways that each of those systems is trying to rear you and help you grow across time? So if those relationships are good, that system operates better. If those relationships are poor, so if your mother doesn't get along with your dad's parents, then that's an example of a situation that doesn't work particularly well and isn't as helpful in that mesosystem. The exosystem refers to environments that have influence on you, but not directly. So imagine your parent goes off to work every day to a job that they hate and a boss that's not family friendly. You're not directly existing in that work environment, but those not family friendly policies are going to impact you because your parent is going to be stressed. They may not be able to spend as much time with you, versus if your parent works in a job that's fulfilling and happy and family friendly and allows that parent to be in a good place when they come home to you after work. So the macro system, this is things that also impact us, but definitely not directly. So this would be societal expectations and cultural values, laws. So, laws about seat belts and child seats for cars. You didn't have any hand in creating those, but they certainly impact you as a child because you have to be restrained, you have to be in particular kinds of car seats. We have family leave policies in our country that aren't particularly generous. This impacts you even though you didn't create that law, because now your parent can't stay at home with you because they are in danger of not being able to get paid and they can't afford to stay home when you're teeny tiny because we don't have effective family leave policies. So it would be those kinds of things. And then finally, the chrono system is the time dimension. So this is both the time period that you grow up in. So I'm a child of the 70s. We didn't have to wear seatbelts, which obviously now a child of the 2000s definitely has to be restrained in a car. Completely different rules and regulations just based on the time period that we grew up in. This is also the time dimension of how your self and your system changes across time. So as you get older, what is included in your systems changes. As you get older, your relationship with those different systems changes. So I was saying earlier that when you're a child, you're subject to responsibilities and regulations and rules that you won't necessarily be subjected to as you get older, as long as that system is dynamic and changes in the way that it's supposed to. It's very important to remember in family-centered practice that our goal isn't to fix families. Often professionals have this idea that families aren't really doing their job very well and that professionals can do it better. But it's really important to remember that we're just there to support families and children. We do not own children, they do not belong to us. They belong to their parents, and for the most part, their parents want the absolute best for them, and are doing the very best that they can to make sure that children have the best outcomes possible. So it's really important to remember that we are a system, we work together. So as an early educator, you're always working in congruence with families. You need to also remember that the family is the primary decision maker for the child. You don't get to make the ultimate decision. It really, again, it's not your child, so you don't get to make the decision about how things are going to go. But families do need support. It's hard work being a parent or a caregiver, and we need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to support them in their primary decision-making role with that child. So we can provide support in terms of being a sounding board. We can provide families with resources that they might need. We can, give them advice if that's something that they're seeking. So there are lots of ways that we can support and share our expertise, as long as we remember that ultimately families are the ones in charge, and it's their children, not ours.
It's important to have family involvement or to engage in family-centered practice because young children spend a lot of time outside of their families. So children do spend the majority of their time with their families, and their families are their primary caregivers, as I was noting earlier. But children also spend a fair amount of time at school. So this is not including infants and toddlers or early elementary school age children, but you can see that just for preschool alone, look how many kids are attending preschool. So typically, if you look at the preschool population or the below 5 population, we say that around 2/3 of kids go to preschool at least for a little bit, but you can see some more specific statistics here in terms of how many children are going to preschool or daycare and spending time outside of their families. So that naturally puts non-familial caregivers or early education providers and family contact with one another. Uh, there's drop-offs, there's pickups, there's communication that needs to happen so that it's clear to early care providers what's happening at home, and it's clear to families what's happening at school. And so when we create the right kinds of relationships and we create family engagement that works, which we'll talk about more on some of the next few slides, we get good benefits. So there's lots of research to show, and I've included just one here for you down at the bottom of the slide, and I also provided the article from the Annie E. Casey Foundation on your Canvas modules. But you can see that when families are more involved at school and in their children's lives in that setting, that we have good outcomes for the children themselves, which really is our bottom line. So when families are involved at school, children are less likely to repeat a grade. They're more prepared academically for later grades. They're more likely to graduate from high school, and they're more likely to be higher earners in the workforce. So when families are involved in schools early on with very young children, look at all the great benefits that we get all the way down the line for kids and their adult success. NAUIC supports family engagement, family involvement, family-centered practice as well. So as we've already discussed, one of the NAUIC DAP guidelines is related to family involvement and making family connections. They have a whole section on their website. I've included the link here on how to navigate family engagement, how that can best be actualized. So I just want you to remember that it's not just, a good thing to do because somebody said so. It's a good thing to do because the top organization in our field, the one that really drives a lot of our effective practice and helps us to think about what is the best evidence-based practice we can be engaging in, supports this endeavor as well. A frequently cited model of parental involvement or family engagement is from Joyce Epstein. So Joyce Epstein laid out 6 ways that we can best interact with families who are in our early childhood orbit. And so these are, the one is that we can help provide knowledge about parenting and child development. So families are their child's first and most primary relationship and have primary responsibility over children. But early childhood educators do have something special to add to that relationship, that home-school relationship, because we have studied early childhood education and child development. So we can be folks who can provide that kind of knowledge and skill to parents as we're working in collaboration with them. Also, part of our job is to make sure that home-to-school communications are effective and regular and supportive of families. Also recognizing that families bring strengths to the relationship, that we're not the only ones who have communication to share. And we'll talk more about some of these things later. This is just kind of our first pass through about what family involvement should be, looking at it from Joyce Epstein's perspective. We should encourage parents to have opportunities to participate at school. So they could have a parent-teacher association, they can have a family organization at the school. So sometimes they run boards or run parent leadership groups. They can help with fundraising efforts or responding to family surveys to make schools better places for both families, children, and the staff who work there. So making sure that there are meaningful ways to be engaged in their child's school community. We can have ways for families to support children in their learning activities at home. We'll talk more about this on an upcoming slide. We can make sure that families get to be involved in governance and decision making. So those PTAs and those parent boards that we might be thinking about, it's not just to come and sit and talk about, an extracurricular activity, but really being involved in how the school is run and what the school's mission is and how it's achieving that mission. And then finally, schools can also encourage not just family involvement, but community involvement. So really thinking about are there resources in the community that families and schools can work together to tap into? Because it really does take a village. It's very difficult to run schools without public or state or federal funding, which many schools do not get. And then they need to also rely on community partners to be successful and keep their doors open over the long run. So just a little bit more in a general sense about how to create effective partnerships with families. So Joyce Epstein's levels of family involvement were one, but I wanted to add on a few additional things that we should be thinking about when we're working to create these partnerships or on this pathway to family engagement. So to tag on to what I was saying on the previous slide, it's really important that families get to be involved in a meaningful way. You don't just want them to come to the school and then hang out in the copy room and copy handouts for you to give to the kids. Like, what can families do that really gets them actively involved in the school and allows them to have a hand in decision making, so that it really is a partnership, that the school works because the staff and the families are there together caring about not just what happens to the children, but what happens to the school. And that the contributions that families make or the suggestions that they have are just as important as the contributions and suggestions of the staff. So communication at the school and decision making at the school should be bi-directional. It should come from parents to staff and teachers, and it should come from staff and teachers to parents, that everyone is talking and communicating back and forth, making decisions together. That really is what a partnership is. It's not just one person telling another person what to do or one person making decisions and then handing it down to the next person. It's really everyone working in concert together to make decisions. So to do those kinds of things, to have meaningful involvement and this bi-directional communication and decision making, we need to make it clear that families are welcome. Sometimes when families come to school, and we'll talk about this more in some upcoming slides when we talk about barriers to family involvement, is sometimes we don't make folks feel very welcome. We don't say hi to them when they come to the door to drop off their children. We don't ask them if they'd like to be part of any kind of parent board that's happening. We don't solicit their feedback, so send out parent surveys to find out what they would like to see happening at the school. So we just do a lot that makes a school feel like it's our domain, the domain of the staff and the teachers, and not the domain of everyone who's there in the building caring for the children. So because parents are coming to our space, it is our job to make them feel welcome and to make them feel like they and part of the communicating that we're doing. So we really have to think about what we can do to make parents feel welcome and kind of start that bi-directional process. Another thing that's very, very important is to remember that not only are parents the primary children, but that all families have strengths and abilities and resources that they bring. They may not be our strengths and abilities and resources, but they are strengths, abilities, and resources. And that as a general rule, families want the absolute very best for their children. They just may have a different way of getting there than we're used to or that feels comfortable to us. So again, if we have that bi-directional relationship and we really value families and we value the funds of knowledge or the strengths and resources that they're bringing, then we open up the door to be able to have conversations and work together on behalf of the child. And you believe that someone is capable. So if you believe a family is capable and you believe that they have resources and you believe that they have strengths and you believe that they are bringing important pieces of knowledge to the table, then you're more likely to listen to them and take their suggestions and ideas, which in turn makes them more open to them taking the suggestions that you're offering, to take the new information that you can be providing with your expertise in child development and early childhood education. You do have many funds of knowledge of your own, but we have to figure out how those fit together with the funds of knowledge that families are bringing. We don't be one-sided where we're just telling families what to do rather than working in concert with them. And then, of course, we need to make sure that we are both interested in and respectful of and understanding of diversity. So get to know the families in your program. It may be easy because the families may come from the same and you already understand cultural values that those families might be bringing to the table. But oftentimes we might have a different cultural background than the families that we're serving. And so it's important for us to learn more about those families. To watch the video on this slide, it talks a little bit about that. Give you an example. So a center that I was working in, there was a child who was not very interested or willing in doing things for themselves. And the teachers were trying to encourage more independence in toileting and eating. He was very, very upset with this. And so there was a meeting, and the family did speak a language other than English as their primary language. They spoke English, but were more comfortable speaking in their home language. So we were able to find a translator to help kind of make the conversation go better so that we could hear the family and understand them more effectively. And we came to find out that in that child's culture, it was considered to be almost child abuse to ask children to do things more independently at the age that that child was. So it wasn't that the family didn't eventually want the child to learn those skills of independence in their culture, that just wasn't acceptable or expected at that particular age. So when we were able to listen first and learn more about that family's culture, then we were able to share in response a bit about American culture and sort of American values on independence and the difficulty in caring for a fairly large classroom of young children and not having children have those particular skills of independence. And so when we were able to have a back and forth conversation where both sides were sharing their values and what was important to them, then we were able to come to a compromise. So the teachers agreed to continue doing some care items for the child, and the family agreed that there were some items that the child could be encouraged to care for themselves, and everybody was happy. But it took really coming to that meeting with the spirit of partnership and really a commitment to bi-directional communication and decision making. And then we were really able to engage the family and begin creating a true partnership with them.
It's important to note that not all families are equally likely to be involved. So just because we want family involvement to happen and just because we have ways for families to be involved doesn't necessarily mean that all families will feel comfortable or all families will have the opportunity. So it's important to think about families who are more or less likely to participate in their children's educational lives or to become involved in that homeschool connection so that we can reach out and do a better job of drawing in families who may be less likely to participate in the kinds of ways that the video a couple slides ago was showing. So one, we do know that families who have a higher income, and so middle income, high income families are more likely to participate. Lower income families are less likely to participate because they have the kinds of jobs generally that don't allow them the opportunity to come and do things during a school day. So we have to think about things that we can do during outside hours, things that are more conducive to incorporating low-income working families. Women are more likely to participate than men are. So again, how can we draw men in? How can we make family involvement less gender specific? Married folks are more likely to participate than non-married folks, probably because married folks have two incomes and one person may be home or working less and has more time and opportunity to become involved than single parents who are often the only wage earners in the family and need to be at work rather than getting involved with these kinds of things. And then employment status, it would be parents or family members who are not employed who have more opportunities to be able to participate in these kinds of activities. In addition to the demographic barriers mentioned above, so demographic kinds of issues that may result in families being less involved in their children's educational settings, there are other barriers to family involvement that we need to consider as well. So sometimes teachers and educators just aren't welcoming. They don't have open door policies. They don't invite families in. They don't talk with them and make them feel welcome, and then families feel like intruders. So it's really important for us as educators to do everything we can to make families feel welcome in our space, because it is our space and families are coming there. So we need to make sure that families feel like it's their space also. Unfortunately, some families have had negative experiences themselves in school. Maybe school wasn't a place where they felt comfortable or happy or welcomed or successful, and to come into an educational environment, even an early childhood educational environment, may feel uncomfortable and not like a place that they would like to be. Sometimes we send messages that we don't trust families. So when we're thinking about family involvement, we are either wanting to save families or we're giving off vibes that we're better than them. We forget that we're partners with families and that families are the primary decision makers for their children. So it's really important for us to give off the message to families that we trust them, that we know they have their children's best interests at heart, that what they want for their children is more important often than what we want for their children, and we need to figure out how to work as partners, not as people who are trying to dictate to families. Also, too, child rearing is a very personal endeavor. So when you make a decision about something that you would like to do for your child and somebody questions it, it makes you feel bad and uncomfortable and like you're doing something wrong and that you're being judged. So it's really important, again, to work together with families and not make them feel uncomfortable or not make them feel like their decision process isn't important and valid. We also need to make sure that there is time for good communication. It's hard during drop-off and pickup because you're busy with other children, there's a lot going on, there's people coming in and out. So can you use apps? Can you use electronic means of communication? Can you put notes for families? Can you have family events where there's more opportunity to just relax and socialize and get to know each other? So really thinking how you can make communication better and more frequent and more authentic will be helpful in encouraging families to become involved as well. And then also doing our due diligence to understand diversity issues and really get to know families and their cultural values, the context that they live in, because a decision that a family makes that may seem unusual to us may be perfectly usual in that cultural context or within the family environment that that child lives in. So it's really important for us to get to know families one-on-one as much as we can so that we can be respectful of the decisions that they make for their children and their families.
So now that we've talked about the definition of family systems theories, and how those relate to our work with young children, what it means to be family engaged or create family partnerships, and how we can best make that happen and why, and what might be some roadblocks to creating those kinds of effective partnerships with families. We're going to spend the next few slides talking about specific ways that we can communicate with families to make those family partnerships the most effective that they can be. So a huge piece of family partnerships is communication. You can't have those good back and forth bi-directional relationships and decision-making opportunities if you don't communicate and talk with each other. So there are various ways that we can communicate with families. Some of them are more formal, which means that they're scheduled and they have a particular agenda. And then there are also many informal opportunities to communicate. So some of the more informal things would be just chit-chatting. Hey, how you doing? How's it going today? How's work? This is a stressful season. I've often worked in centers that are on college campuses, and many of our clients are students. And so it's, obviously they have times of the semester that are more stressful, and we can just engage in those kinds of conversations. When you get to know people and you like each other, it's easier to have more formal conversations about other things. So some of the ways that we can more formally communicate is we can write down things that are happening and give those to families. Those are called daily logs. We do this often with infants and toddlers. We write down when they ate and when they slept and when they engaged in toileting activities or had their diapers changed. And we make sure that families have that information when they go home so that they can more effectively plan the rest of their day with their child. Sometimes we do weekly updates, and those can be personal to a child. They can also be for the whole classroom. So here's the things that we were doing this week, and here's the things that the children thought were fun. Or it can just be a brief update about your own child and how their week went. If it's an older child, we can, oftentimes we're required to send home homework once children get into the early elementary grades. But I would encourage you to think about how to make that active. So rather than sending home yet another worksheet to do, perhaps think about having children go on scavenger hunts or engage in games with their families, things that are more authentic and playful, but still get at those learning objectives that are required in a homework scenario. We can have regularly scheduled conferences. So oftentimes schools will have a fall conference and a spring conference where you schedule a formal time to sit down and talk, to go over children's developmental milestones and how those are being met, to go over their academic progress and anything else families and teachers might think to discuss. We can visit families at their homes. This can be more formal or informal. I have been on family visits, and sometimes it really is just to visit, where you go hang out and talk with the family and get to see the child in a different kind of setting and see sort of what their home routines are and where they live and all that kind of stuff. So those they can be formal, they can have a particular purpose, or they can just be more informal to come say hi and get ourselves out of our own setting. And rather than the family always being a guest in our setting, we can go be a guest in their setting if that's something that's comfortable for them. So obviously with technology, there's a lot of ways that we can make these kinds of communication settings happen through a technological way. We don't have to sit face to face in a conference. We could Zoom or Skype or what have you, or FaceTime if that's more convenient for a family rather than having to drive all the way over to the school, maybe when they work or aren't able to have that time to be able to come to the school outside of picking up and dropping off children. We can use things like Remind and send messages to individual families or the whole class. So there's all kinds of technology kinds of tips that we can take advantage of to make communication even better. So I would encourage you to take a look at the article included on this slide from NAAYC on how to use technology to better engage families. So it's important to think about when you're communicating your own communication style and make sure that you are using a style that best fits a bidirectional relationship and making families feel heard and seen without relegating yourself to the background. So there is an art to finding just the right conversational tone or the right communication style. So you don't want to be aggressive. You don't want to have your own opinion be the only one and be telling people what to do and not listening to others and the ideas that they have. And, sometimes when people are aggressive, they attack the ideas of others to make their idea be the one that gets heard and executed. So we certainly don't want to be aggressive, but we also don't want to be passive in conversation with families where we are afraid to express our own opinion or to think about how we can fit our opinion into the ones that are being presented. So being able to say what we feel and think as well, not just deferring always to family. So you want to kind of find that middle where you're listening to other people, but you're not acting deferential and then not putting out something important for families to consider. So we always want to make sure that we're being assertive when we can, that we're expressing ourselves clearly and confidently, that we're maintaining eye contact, that we are speaking firmly when need be, that we are, if we need to say no about something, that we can do that. So I would really encourage you to take a look at this chart on this slide and think about what is your natural communication style, and then work towards being an assertive communicator when you're interacting with families. So not aggressive, not passive, but assertive. Last few slides, I want to talk about how to navigate conversations that are scheduled, like a parent-teacher conference, or conversations that need to happen when maybe something more difficult is occurring, more challenging to discuss. So let's first talk about just generally how to navigate scheduled conversations. So if you have an appointment with a family member, how to make that best work. So first of all is make sure that the time is convenient for everyone. Again, that may necessitate using technology, because a convenient time may be when a parent is at work on their lunch and can't physically drive there, but could hop on Zoom and have a conversation at that time. So if the convenient isn't time for either person involved in the conversation, then somebody's going to come to the table with stress, and that's not going to make a good one. So be prepared. So have written down anything that's important to write down before the conversation. So if you're coming to talk with a family member in a conference, you want to have information about how the child's doing developmentally in different areas, how they're doing academically in different areas, how they're doing in terms of interacting with others and other guidance related matters, what their play looks like, just all the things. So you need to have that information written down. If you have any evidence that supports the things that you've been noticing or the things you observe about the child, make sure that you bring those with you as well. But don't just show up kind of ready to talk. Show up ready with information needed for a productive conversation. Always begin with small talk. So, hi, how are you? Don't just jump right into the heavy stuff or the official stuff. You want to establish a little bit of rapport to start with. I also recommend asking open-ended questions. So rather than me starting with what I want to talk about related to the child, I generally start with, is there anything that you'd like to bring up today? Is there anything that you feel is important for us to talk about? And listen to the family first, and then present the information that you have and that you wanted to share. Because if you ask the family first and listening to them, you're establishing that this is going to be a two-way or a dialogic conversation. So dialogic just means two-way, back and forth. And those are ways that we can set the tone for and understanding that this can be a back and forth or dialogic conversation. Be careful about jargon. Jargon means language that's not understandable to everyone else. So, sometimes in the early childhood world, we use the word cognitive to talk about how children think. So if you use the word cognitive, pair it with the word thinking so that families understand what you're getting at. So make sure that you're using language that's not just understandable to those of us who are studying this field, but is understandable to folks who have expertise in other areas of life. As we talked about before, always making sure to respect diverse opinions and ideas and values and ways of doing things, and recognizing that families bring their own funds of knowledge, that they probably know about things that you don't know about, and they know about ways of doing things that you don't, and that those have value and importance and matter to that child. And then finally, when you get to the end of that meeting and everybody has shared everything that they want to share and all the information that was brought has been shown, you want to kind of summarize the meeting. So, let me just summarize. Here's what we talked about today, and here's what we've agreed that we're going to do going forward. So here's what you're going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what we're hoping that the child will do. So you always want to leave with some sort of summary and plan for the future. So this chart is from your book, and it's kind of getting at what we were talking about with different communication styles being passive, aggressive, or assertive, but it's more specific to engaging in challenging conversations with someone else. And so typically, if we're being passive, if our communication style is passive, when we're engaging in challenging conversations, we may give all our power to the other person in the conversation. So we come to the challenging conversation with no power. And so we might walk away, give up, not share our feelings and opinions, try to change the subject. It's a way to avoid the challenging conversation because we tend to have a more passive communication style. If we have a more aggressive communication style, we might come to challenging conversations kind of ready to fight. So we may resort to, putting down people, threatening them. We kind of want to be the winner. So, imagine if you're coming to a family conversation and you either avoid or fight. So if you avoid, the family member says like, no, I don't want to do this. Like, my kid doesn't have to be at school on time. They're not going to, feed themselves, whatever it is, right? And you just say, okay, whatever you want. Or if you're fighting and you come in like armed and ready, like I'm going to win this conversation and there's not going to be any other person who gets to be the winner, and this is what I want the child to be doing, and to heck with what that family wants or thinks, it's going to be my way or the highway. So of course we want to try to lean into our assertive selves, and in a challenging conversation, lean into shared power or negotiation or compromise. So when we have dialogic communication and we're each sharing a side of what we would like to see happen in a particular situation, where we work to seek solutions rather than one person just by default the winner because I gave up, or on the flip side, I'm just trying to win and I don't really care what you had to say. Instead, I'm coming to the table wanting to work with you and create a solution together, because then both sides win. That's what compromise is all about, is both sides walk away feeling like they got their needs met. And ultimately, our job is to facilitate the best outcome for the child. And the best outcome for the child is when schools and families work together in a partnership. We already saw that data earlier, that there's good outcomes for children when schools and families work effectively together. So really, not just both sides, but all three partners in the relationship, the school, the families, and the child, can all be winners when we utilize a shared power or negotiation strategy during challenging conversations. This graphic is also from your textbook and gives you some tips to use when negotiating or engaging in those shared power conversations.
So they suggest that everyone starts, so everyone, both sides, start with expressing their preferences, interests, and concerns. So we had a child one time in one of our classrooms whose family would not allow a male child to wear dress up clothes that they thought were more consistent with femininity. So particularly there was a little tutu in the classroom, and the parents were very upset because they came in one day and their child was wearing the tutu. This was a 2-year-old classroom. And so we met, and it was very important in the meeting to make sure that everyone got to share both sides. And so the side of the center was that dress up clothes are for all the children in the classroom, regardless of biological sex or gender, and that we don't stop children from wearing or participating in activities that they're interested in. The family side was that they were very worried that this might lead to their child being homosexual, and that they were very uncomfortable with him wearing clothes that they considered to be feminine. And so that's where we started. We just started by talking about the two different perspectives, and then that opened up the door to be able to say, okay, what are next steps going to be? So that would be step 2, find common ground. So we were all able to agree that playing dress up is good. It was just what was being offered for dress up play that was problematic. So we agreed that we would provide a wider variety of dress up clothes, that we would provide dress up opportunities that were both traditionally female and traditionally male. So like bow ties and, like vests that you might wear like to a dance or something like that, or to work. Now, the one thing that we also did agree on, so we agreed to provide more opportunities, but the family also agreed that if we provided more opportunities and if the child still gravitated towards the tutu, that we would just have to leave that alone, and that would need to be okay. So that we did manage to land on some common ground there in kind of a challenging conversation. So that step 3 was, we kind of had to identify that there would be a little bit of flexibility. That was the flexibility, that we were going to leave the tutu, even though we would add more things in, but that if the tutu was chosen, we weren't going to make a big deal of it. And we all did agree that children typically lose interest in things fairly quickly, and that not worrying too much about the tutu in the short term was probably, a better strategy in the long term, at least in terms of the family's concerns, because the child probably would lose interest and want to be playing with other things anyway. So, we were, part of this process was kind of brainstorming different ideas and strategies. The parents did a lot of brainstorming about different items that they thought that their child might be interested in terms of dress up, and we all agreed to work on including those. There was a little bit of talk about how to, encourage the child to use other dress up clothes while not taking away his freedom of choice to choose the tutu if he wanted to. And then we agreed that we would try out all this brainstorming and this implementation of common ground, and then try it out for a little while, see how it went, and then come back and meet and convene again if need be. But that's one example of how you can use these steps to navigate a more challenging conversation and be utilizing shared power or negotiation. And just finally, I did want to point out that there are some things that are too challenging and are not necessarily the kind that you're going to sit down with a family member and have conversation with. So if you suspect abuse, there comes a point where you need to call Child Protective Services. So all teachers in classrooms are mandated reporters. If you work in a classroom, you will be required to take mandated reporter training. At Cal State San Bernardino, where I also work, we make our students, if they are doing lab or practicum hours in classrooms, we make them take the mandated reporter training as well. because if you suspect that a child is being physically, verbally, or sexually abused, or emotionally abused, you need to call and report that. And the mandated reporter training tells you how to do that. In your modules on Canvas, I did give you the link to the mandated reporter training site for California for child care providers that you can look at further or take that training if you are interested.